There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew shatters in an instant. For Marcus Dalton, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon when he walked into his own home and saw something that would change everything. But this isn't his story. Not really. This is about the young woman who saw what everyone else missed, who heard the silence that screamed louder than words, and who risked everything for two children who couldn't ask for help. This is about the truth hiding in plain sight and the courage it takes to speak when no one wants to listen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Vasquez had been invisible for most of her 23 years, and she'd learned to prefer it that way. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant people didn't ask questions about the fading bruises on her wrists or why she'd dropped out of nursing school halfway through her final year. Invisible meant she could slip through the grand oak doors of the Dalton mansion at 6 in the morning and leave at 8 in the evening without anyone really seeing her at all. The Dalton estate sat on 5 acres in Westchester County, New York. A sprawling monument to success with its limestone facade and perfectly manicured gardens. It was the kind of place Elena had only seen in magazines before she'd answered the job posting 6 months ago. Seeking experienced caregiver for special needs twins, age 4. Discretion essential. Competitive salary. The salary had been competitive enough to make her ignore the pit in her stomach. The voice that whispered that people didn't usually emphasize discretion unless they had something to hide. But Elena needed the money. More than that, she needed to disappear, and where better to vanish than inside someone else's perfect life. The twins, Milo and Maya, had been born premature, or so Elena had been told, during her single brief interview with Mrs. Vivian Dalton. They were 4 years old now and still couldn't walk, couldn't speak, couldn't feed themselves. Vivian had delivered this information in a crisp, clinical tone while examining her own manicured nails, as if discussing a disappointing quarterly report rather than her own children. Marcus Dalton, the CEO of Dalton Tech Industries, hadn't been present for the interview. Elena had only seen him in photographs scattered throughout the house. A tall man with steel-grey eyes and the kind of jawline that belonged on magazine covers. Always photographed at charity galas or tech conferences. Never with his children. Elena's days followed a rigid pattern. She would arrive before the rest of the household stirred, climbing 3 flights of stairs to the west wing, where the twins' nursery occupied what should have been a master suite. The room was pristine, decorated in soft creams and pale blues, with top-of-the-line medical equipment that mostly went unused. The twins would be awake already. They were always awake, sitting motionless in their respective cribs, staring at nothing in particular with those unsettling dark eyes that seemed far too aware for children who supposedly couldn't comprehend the world around them. The previous caregiver had lasted 2 weeks. The one before that, 3 days. Elena had discovered their reviews on a private caregiver forum she'd stumbled across. "Something off about those kids," one had written. "They just stare. It's unnatural." Another had been more blunt. "The family doesn't want them helped. They want them managed." I couldn't be part of that. Elena had almost walked away then, her finger hovering over the delete button on the email confirming her start date. But then she'd checked her bank account, looked at the eviction notice she'd hidden in her desk drawer, and reported for duty the following Monday. Those first few weeks, she'd followed the routine outlined in the leather-bound manual left on the nursery dresser. Feed the twins their pureed meals, change them, bathe them, keep them clean, quiet, and contained. Don't overstimulate them. Don't attempt any therapies not approved by their physician, Dr. Bernard Holbrook, who visited once a month to nod solemnly and adjust medications that Elena was never quite sure the children actually needed. The thing was, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was doing something terribly wrong, even as she followed every instruction to the letter. She'd spent 2.5 years in nursing school before everything fell apart, and her instincts screamed that something didn't add up. Premature twins could have developmental delays, certainly, but Milo and Maya didn't have the muscle tone issues she'd expect. When she lifted them, they weren't limp or spastic. Their bodies were simply waiting, and their eyes tracked movement with a precision that contradicted every diagnosis in their thick medical files. Vivian Dalton barely entered the nursery. On the rare occasions she did, it was with a handkerchief pressed delicately to her nose, as though the children themselves were distasteful. She was a striking woman in her early 40s, with platinum blonde hair, always swept into an elaborate updo, and a wardrobe that probably cost more than Elena would earn in 5 years. She chaired 3 charity boards, hosted elaborate dinner parties, and had never, in Elena's presence, touched either of her children. "They require professional care," Vivian had said once, when Elena had suggested perhaps the twins might benefit from more family interaction. "That's why you're here, Miss Vasquez. I trust you're not questioning your role?" Elena had learned not to question anything after that. The house itself operated like a well-oiled machine, managed by a staff of 8. There was Thomas, the aging butler, who'd been with the family for 20 years and spoke only when absolutely necessary. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, who ran the household with military efficiency. A rotating cast of maids, gardeners, and a private chef who prepared meals Elena never saw the family eat together. Everyone had their domain, their responsibilities, and an unspoken understanding that the Daltons' private affairs remained exactly that, private. Marcus Dalton himself was a ghost in his own home. Elena would hear about him more than see him. The rumble of his BMW in the driveway at odd hours, his voice carrying from his study during late-night conference calls, the way the staff would suddenly stand straighter when he was expected home. In 6 months, he'd spoken to Elena exactly 4 times, and 3 of those had been a curt good morning when they'd passed in the hallway. The 4th time had been different. It was a Friday, and Elena had been reading to the twins from a picture book about elephants, not because the manual instructed it, but because the silence of that pristine nursery had started to feel suffocating. Milo had been staring at the colorful illustrations with an intensity that made Elena's breath catch. Without thinking, she'd reached out and gently turned his head so he could see better. His neck had moved easily, smoothly, exactly the way a typical 4-year-old's would. "What are you doing?" Elena had spun around to find Marcus Dalton standing in the doorway, still in his suit from the office, his briefcase in hand. Up close, he was somehow both more and less intimidating than his photographs suggested. Taller, certainly, with broad shoulders and an air of controlled power. But there were shadows under his eyes, and his expensive tie was loosened, as if he'd been tugging at it. "I was just reading to them, sir," Elena had stammered, her heart hammering. He'd looked at his children then, really looked at them, and something had flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. It was gone before Elena could name it. "The doctor says they can't comprehend stories," he'd said, but there was a question buried in the statement. "Perhaps not, sir," Elena had replied carefully. "But it doesn't hurt to try." He'd stared at her for a long moment, and Elena had been certain she was about to be fired. Instead, he'd simply nodded once and left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded entirely. That had been 2 months ago, and Elena hadn't been able to stop thinking about it since. About the way Milo had tracked the pictures, about the muscle tone that didn't match the diagnosis, about Maya's fingers, which had flexed ever so slightly when Elena had sung a lullaby one particularly difficult evening. Something was wrong in the Dalton house, hidden beneath the crystal chandeliers and imported marble floors. Elena could feel it in her bones, the same way she'd felt the presence of danger in the months before she'd fled her old life. The same instinct that had kept her alive was now screaming at her to pay attention, to look closer, to see what everyone else was determinedly ignoring. But invisible girls didn't ask questions. Invisible girls kept their heads down and cashed their paychecks and survived. At least, that's what Elena kept telling herself, even as she started arriving 15 minutes earlier each morning, even as she began watching the twins with the clinical eye she'd developed in nursing school, even as she started to realize that Milo and Maya weren't broken at all. They were trapped. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The discovery happened on a Wednesday morning in late September, when the autumn light filtered through the nursery windows in shades of amber and gold. Elena had developed a secret routine over the past few weeks, one that wasn't in the leather-bound manual and would certainly get her fired if anyone found out. Every morning, after completing the prescribed feeding and cleaning, she would spend an extra 20 minutes doing what she called observations. She'd noted that Milo's left hand would curl slightly when she played classical music from her phone. That Maya's breathing pattern changed when Elena moved to different parts of the room. Small things, barely perceptible things, but things that suggested awareness far beyond what their medical charts indicated. This particular morning, Elena had brought a small red ball from the dollar store, hidden in her jacket pocket. Nothing fancy. Just a simple rubber sphere that fit in the palm of her hand. She wasn't sure what had possessed her to buy it, except that some deep instinct told her these children needed stimulation, not sedation. She placed Maya in her specialized floor seat first, the one with extra support that kept the little girl upright. Maya's dark eyes followed Elena's movements with that same unsettling precision. Elena had stopped finding it creepy weeks ago. Now she found it heartbreaking. "Okay, sweet girl," Elena whispered, kneeling on the plush carpet. "I'm going to try something. If you can see this, I need you to show me somehow. Can you do that?" She held the red ball at eye level, about 2 feet from Maya's face. The child's gaze locked onto it immediately. Elena moved it slowly to the left. Maya's eyes tracked it perfectly. To the right, same smooth tracking, up, down, in a circle. Maya followed every movement with the focus of a much older child. Elena's heart began to pound. This wasn't the random eye movement of a severely delayed child. This was intentional, controlled. "You can see it, can't you?" Elena breathed. "You understand exactly what I'm saying." She moved to Milo next, her hands trembling slightly as she positioned him in his own floor seat. The little boy had his father's dark hair and his mother's delicate features, though his expression held none of Vivian's coldness. If anything, there was a desperate hunger in his eyes that made Elena's chest ache. She repeated the exercise with the ball. Milo's tracking was even more precise than his sister's. When Elena deliberately dropped the ball and let it roll across the floor, his eyes followed its entire trajectory until it disappeared under the dresser. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, sitting back on her heels. Her mind raced through everything she'd learned in nursing school, every developmental milestone chart she'd memorized. 4-year-olds with the severe delays described in the twins' files shouldn't be capable of this kind of focused attention. They shouldn't be able to track objects smoothly through space. They shouldn't show preferential looking or sustained visual engagement. But Milo and Maya could do all of those things. Elena retrieved the ball and sat cross-legged between the 2 floor seats. "I'm going to try something else, okay? If you understand me, if you can move even a little bit, I need you to try, please." She placed the ball directly in front of Milo, just inches from his hand. "Can you reach for it? Even just move your fingers toward it." For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Elena felt foolish, sitting on the floor talking to children who had been declared neurologically incapable of comprehension. She was about to give up when she saw it, the tiniest movement of Milo's right index finger. It extended maybe a quarter of an inch, trembling with effort, straining toward the red ball. Tears sprang to Elena's eyes. "Yeah, oh, Milo, yes, you can move. I knew it. I knew you could." She turned to Maya, placing the ball in front of her. "Your turn, sweetheart. Show me what you can do." Maya's response was different. Instead of reaching, her eyes moved deliberately from the ball to Elena's face and back again. 3 times. The pattern was too intentional to be coincidence. She was communicating the only way she could. Elena spent the next hour testing everything she could think of. She discovered that both twins could move their fingers slightly, though the movement seemed to exhaust them. They could shift their gaze on command. When Elena held up 2 picture books and asked them to look at the one with animals, both children looked at the correct book immediately. They understood language. They understood instructions. They had awareness, intelligence, maybe even normal cognition. They were locked inside bodies that weren't responding the way they should. And everyone around them had decided they were broken beyond repair. The implications crashed over Elena like a wave. The medications Dr. Holbrook prescribed, what were they actually doing? The lack of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, all the interventions that should have been standard for children with developmental delays, why had they been refused? And Vivian's insistence on professional care that consisted entirely of keeping the children clean, quiet, and isolated. What was the real purpose? Elena's hands shook as she returned the twins to their cribs for their scheduled rest period. Her mind spun through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Medical neglect was one thing, but this felt like something else entirely, something deliberate. She thought about the twins' trust fund, mentioned once in a conversation she'd overheard between Vivian and the family attorney. Something about access, being dependent on the children's continued incapacity. At the time, Elena had assumed it was standard special needs planning. Now the phrase took on a sinister weight. What if the twins weren't sick at all? What if they were being kept this way? The thought was so monstrous that Elena immediately tried to dismiss it. People didn't do that. Mothers didn't deliberately harm their own children for money. But even as she tried to convince herself, she remembered Vivian's cold eyes, the way she spoke about Milo and Maya as though they were problems to be managed rather than children to be loved. She remembered the rotating staff of caregivers. None kept on long enough to notice patterns. She remembered Dr. Holbrook's visits, always brief, always resulting in prescription adjustments that seemed to make the twins more lethargic rather than less. Elena pulled out her phone with trembling hands and opened the camera. She needed documentation, evidence, something concrete before she could even think about what to do next. She took careful video of the ball exercises, of the twins' precise eye tracking, of Milo's finger movement. She kept her narration clinical, describing what she was seeing in the objective language she'd learned in nursing school. When she finished, she stared at the videos on her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment when invisibility would no longer protect her, the moment when she'd have to decide whether safety mattered more than the truth. She thought of Milo's trembling finger, reaching with everything he had toward that red ball. She thought of Maya's desperate eyes, trying so hard to communicate with nothing but a gaze. She thought of 2 children trapped in a beautiful prison, surrounded by people who had decided they weren't worth saving. Elena had fled her old life to escape danger, had made herself small and invisible to survive. But maybe some things were worth being seen for. Maybe some silences needed to be broken, no matter the cost. She saved the videos to a secure cloud folder and slipped her phone back into her pocket. She didn't know yet what she was going to do with the evidence, didn't know who she could trust or how to proceed. But she knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. The twins were awake, aware, and trapped. And Elena Vasquez, invisible girl and professional survivor, had just become the only person in the world who knew the truth. Everything was about to change. Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay in her cramped studio apartment in Yonkers, staring at the water-stained ceiling, her phone clutched in her hand like a talisman. The videos sat in her cloud storage, encrypted and hidden, but they might as well have been burning a hole through the device. 3 times she'd started typing an email to Child Protective Services. 3 times she'd deleted it before finishing the first sentence. The problem was evidence, or rather the lack of it, that would actually matter. She had videos of children tracking a ball with their eyes and moving their fingers slightly. To her, armed with nursing school knowledge and weeks of observation, it was proof of awareness and capability. To a caseworker with a stack of medical files signed by a licensed physician, declaring the twins profoundly delayed, it would look like wishful thinking at best, incompetence at worst. Dr. Bernard Holbrook's credentials were impeccable. Elena had looked him up after her discovery, spending hours down internet rabbit holes. Harvard Medical School, 20 years specializing in pediatric neurology. Published research. A townhouse in Manhattan's Upper East Side. He wasn't some quack she could easily discredit. If she accused him of misdiagnosis or worse, who would believe a 23-year-old college dropout over a man like that? And then there was the Dalton family itself. Marcus Dalton's net worth was estimated at somewhere north of $800 million. His company had contracts with the Department of Defense. Vivian sat on the board of Manhattan Memorial Hospital, where coincidentally Dr. Holbrook held privileges. These were people with power, connections, and the resources to bury anyone who threatened them. Elena knew what happened to people who went up against the powerful. She'd watched it happen to her own mother, a housekeeper who'd reported wage theft at a hotel chain. The lawsuit had dragged on for 3 years, draining what little savings they had before being settled for a fraction of what was owed. Her mother had been blacklisted, unable to find work in the industry that was all she knew. They'd lost their apartment. Elena had watched her mother's spirit crack a little more each day, until there was nothing left but bitterness and defeat. That was over wage theft. This was about children, about possible medical abuse, about a conspiracy that involved doctors and lawyers and people who made the hotel chain's management look like corner store shopkeepers. Elena could disappear again. It was what she was good at after all. She could quit, claim a family emergency, vanish into another city with another name. The twins would remain trapped, but they'd been trapped long before she arrived. It wasn't her responsibility. She wasn't their mother, wasn't even their real nurse. She was just the help, and the help didn't challenge families like the Daltons, except she couldn't stop seeing Milo's finger trembling with effort as he reached for that red ball. Couldn't stop seeing Maya's eyes, so desperate to communicate, to be understood. They were 4 years old. 4 years of being locked in silence, of being treated as less than human by their own mother, of being medicated into docility when they should have been running and playing and learning to read. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message, making her jump. It was from her roommate from nursing school, Jessica, one of the few people from her old life who still had this number. "Hey, stranger. Saw a posting for an RN position at my hospital. Benefits are amazing. Want me to send you the link? You should finish your degree, Elle. You were so close." Elena stared at the message for a long moment. Jessica didn't know why Elena had dropped out. Didn't know about the professor who'd started the semester with helpful study sessions and ended it with his hand on her knee, his recommendations for how she could ensure a passing grade. Didn't know about the Title IX complaint that went nowhere, or the sudden academic probation that appeared in her file afterward, or the choice Elena had faced between fighting a battle she couldn't win or walking away with what remained of her sanity. She'd chosen invisibility then, too. Safety over justice. Survival over truth. "Thanks," Elena typed back. "I'll think about it." But even as she sent the message, she knew she wouldn't click the link. That version of her life was gone, and she'd made peace with it. Mostly, the next morning, Elena arrived at the Dalton mansion with her stomach in knots. She'd made no decisions, formed no plan, but the weight of what she knew felt like it was crushing her from the inside out. Mrs. Chen met her at the staff entrance, her usually impassive face tight with something Elena couldn't quite read. "Miss Vasquez, Mrs. Dalton would like to see you in the sitting room before you go up to the nursery." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Did she say why?" "That's not my place to ask." Mrs. Chen's tone was neutral, but there was something in her eyes. A warning, maybe. The sitting room was on the first floor, a cathedral-ceilinged space decorated in shades of cream and gold. Vivian Dalton sat on a velvet settee, her posture perfect, a teacup balanced on her knee. She didn't look up when Elena entered. "You've been with us for 6 months now, Miss Vasquez," Vivian said, finally raising her eyes. They were ice blue and completely empty. "Mrs. Chen tells me you're reliable, punctual. The children seem settled with you." "Thank you, Mom." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm hosting a charity gala next month. 300 guests. I'll need the nursery wing completely quiet during the event. I trust that won't be a problem." "Of course not, ma'am." Vivian took a delicate sip of tea. "You understand that discretion is paramount in this household. The children's condition is difficult for some people to understand. We've had caregivers in the past who had inappropriate opinions about their care, who overstepped their bounds." Her gaze sharpened. "You seem smarter than that." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Elena felt it like a blade against her throat. "I understand my role, Mrs. Dalton. Do you?" Vivian set down her teacup with a soft click. "Because I would hate to lose another caregiver. The turnover is so tiresome, and it would be unfortunate if any misunderstandings about the twins' care led to complications. For everyone involved." Elena's mouth went dry. Did Vivian know about the videos? Had there been cameras in the nursery she'd missed? Or was this just routine intimidation, the kind of conversation Vivian had with every caregiver to ensure their silence? "There won't be any misunderstandings," Elena heard herself say. "Excellent." Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You may go." Elena climbed the 3 flights of stairs to the nursery on legs that felt like water. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door. Milo and Maya were in their cribs, awake and watching her with those knowing eyes. She went through the morning routine mechanically, her mind racing. Vivian's message had been clear: stay quiet, stay invisible, or face consequences. And Vivian Dalton had the power to make those consequences devastating. A bad reference would make Elena unemployable in childcare. Legal action for breach of confidentiality could follow her forever. And who knew what else someone with Vivian's resources could do to a young woman with no family, no connections, and a past she'd rather keep buried. The smart thing would be to do exactly what Vivian expected. Keep her head down, cash her paychecks, ignore what she knew. But as Elena looked at Milo and Maya, trapped in their prison of silence, she felt something shift inside her chest. Fear was still there, sharp and insistent. But underneath it, burning brighter, was something else: rage. These children deserved better than invisibility. They deserved better than being kept as prisoners in their own bodies because the truth was inconvenient. They deserved someone willing to be seen, to be loud, to fight. Elena pulled out her phone and opened a new browser window. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before she began to type, "How to report suspected child abuse when the family is wealthy." The fear didn't disappear. But for the first time since she'd walked away from nursing school, Elena Vasquez was choosing to stand her ground, even if it destroyed her. The attorney's office was in a converted brownstone in Brooklyn, far enough from Manhattan that Elena felt reasonably safe from the Daltons' sphere of influence. She'd found Rachel Okonkwo through 3 hours of desperate internet searching, looking for lawyers who specialized in whistleblower cases and didn't charge consultation fees. Rachel was younger than Elena expected, maybe 30, with natural hair pulled back in a colorful wrap and a directness that was both intimidating and reassuring. She listened without interruption as Elena explained everything, her fingers steepled under her chin. "Let me make sure I understand," Rachel said when Elena finished. "You have videos of the children demonstrating visual tracking and minimal finger movement. You have observations suggesting they understand language. But you have no medical training beyond incomplete nursing coursework. And you're going up against a board-certified neurologist's formal diagnosis." "I know how it sounds," Elena said, her chest tight. "But I'm telling you, these kids are aware. They're being kept incapacitated deliberately. For what purpose? There's a trust fund. I overheard Vivian talking about it with their lawyer. Something about the money being managed differently because of the twins' continued incapacity. I think... Eleanor swallowed hard. I think as long as they're declared incompetent, someone controls that money. Probably Vivian. Rachel leaned back in her chair. That's a serious accusation. You're talking about Munchausen by proxy, medical child abuse, fraud. Do you understand what happens if you're wrong? I'm not wrong. The Daltons will bury you. Marcus Dalton has 3 law firms on retainer. You'll be painted as a disgruntled employee, possibly unstable. They'll dig into your background, and I'm guessing there are things there you'd rather keep private. Elena flinched, but didn't look away. There are. They'll use them. Every mistake you've ever made, every vulnerability, it becomes ammunition. Rachel's expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to scare you off. I'm making sure you understand what you're walking into. I understand. Eleanor's voice was quiet but steady. But those kids have been trapped for 4 years. If I walk away, who helps them? Who even sees them? Rachel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, here's what we need. First, you keep documenting everything, but you need to be smarter about it. Medical observations, timestamps, specific incidents. Create a detailed journal with dates and times. Second, we need someone with actual medical credentials to evaluate the twins. Someone independent who can't be bought. How do we do that? I can't exactly bring them in for a second opinion. No, but you can build a case compelling enough that CPS has to investigate. And when they investigate, they'll bring their own doctors. Rachel pulled out a legal pad and started writing. We're going to need more than your videos, though. We need patterns, documentation of the medications they're on, and why those particular drugs were prescribed. Any medical records you can access. And ideally, testimony from other staff members. Eleanor thought of Mrs. Chen's warning look, of Thomas the butler's careful neutrality, of the rotating caregivers who'd all quit without explanation. The staff won't talk. They're either loyal to the family or too scared. Someone always talks, Rachel said. You just have to find the right person. What about the previous caregivers? The ones who quit? Elena sat up straighter. The forum. There was a private caregiver forum, where some of them posted reviews. I could try to track them down. Do it. But be careful how you approach them. You're looking for corroboration, not co-conspirators. Rachel slid a business card across the desk. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to your housekeeper. She's a pediatric neurologist who does consulting work for Child Protective Services. If we can get your documentation to her, get her professional opinion on record, it strengthens everything. Eleanor pocketed the card, feeling something like hope stirring in her chest for the first time in days. What do I do about work? Do I quit? Absolutely not. You quit now, you lose access to the twins and any future evidence. You stay, you document, you act normal. Rachel's gaze was intense. This is the hard part, Elena. You have to go back into that house every day, look Vivian Dalton in the eye, and pretend everything is fine. Can you do that? Elena thought about acting classes she'd taken in high school, back when she'd dreamed of being someone else, somewhere else. She'd gotten good at pretending. Her whole life since nursing school had been an act. Yes, she said. I can do that. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena became a woman divided. During the day, she was the perfect caregiver, punctual, efficient, invisible. She followed every instruction in the manual, administered medications on schedule, kept detailed logs that would satisfy any inspection. She smiled politely at Vivian's occasional inspections and made herself as unremarkable as possible. But in the stolen moments, during the twins' nap times, in the early morning before the household stirred, late at night in her apartment, she was someone else entirely. She was a detective, a documentarian, a woman on a mission. She photographed the medication bottles and researched each drug. Lorazepam, a benzodiazepine typically used for anxiety and seizures, prescribed at doses that seemed high for children the twins' size. Baclofen, a muscle relaxant. Clonidine, used for ADHD but also known to cause sedation. Separately, each might be justifiable. Together, they painted a picture of children being chemically restrained rather than treated. She created detailed spreadsheets tracking the twins' alertness levels at different times of day, noting that they were most responsive in the early mornings before their first medication doses. She documented every instance of intentional movement, every sign of comprehension, building a timeline that told a story medical records couldn't erase, and she reached out to the former caregivers. The first two never responded to her carefully worded emails. The third, a woman named Patricia Hollis, who'd worked for the Daltons 2 years ago, replied with a single line, "Don't contact me again." But the fourth, Jennifer Kowalski, agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Queens. Jennifer was in her 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes. She ordered black coffee and spent the first 10 minutes looking over her shoulder like she expected Vivian Dalton to materialize from thin air. "I lasted 11 days, Jennifer finally said. "Longest 11 days of my career. Those kids," she shook her head. "I'd worked with special needs children for 20 years. I know developmental delays. What those twins had wasn't natural." "Did you report it?" Elena asked. "To who? The mother who was paying me? The doctor who signed off on everything?" Jennifer's laugh was bitter. "I tried talking to Mr. Dalton once. Caught him in the hallway and said maybe the twins should see a specialist, get a second opinion. You know what he said?" Elena leaned forward. "What?" "He said, 'Oh, my wife handles the children's medical care.' Like that was the end of it. Like he'd washed his hands of them completely." Jennifer took a long sip of coffee. "I quit the next day. Couldn't sleep knowing I was part of it, whatever it was. But I didn't report it because I was a coward. Because people like the Daltons don't face consequences, and people like me don't win fights against them." "I'm going to report it," Elena said quietly. "I'm building a case." Jennifer stared at her. "You're serious?" "Yes. They'll destroy you." "Probably." Elena pulled out her phone and showed Jennifer some of the videos. "But look at this. Look at how Maya tracks movement. Look at Milo trying to reach. They're in there, Jennifer. They're aware and trapped and no one's helping them." Jennifer watched the videos, her eyes glistening. When she looked up, her expression had changed. "What do you need from me?" "A statement. Everything you observed when you worked there. It doesn't have to be formal, just your professional opinion as someone with 20 years of experience. If I do this, I can't use the Daltons as a reference. Could hurt my ability to get jobs? I know. I'm not asking lightly." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out her own phone. "I kept notes. I always keep notes on my cases. I'll send them to you." She met Elena's eyes. "Those babies deserve better. If you're brave enough to fight, I can at least give you ammunition." Elena left the coffee shop with Jennifer's promise of a statement and a USB drive full of notes. It wasn't everything she needed, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. For the first time since discovering the truth about Milo and Maya, Elena felt like she wasn't fighting alone. The path ahead was still terrifying, still potentially devastating. But she'd taken the first steps, and there was no turning back now. The question wasn't whether she'd see this through. It was whether she'd survive what came next. The CPS report was filed on a grey October morning, 3 weeks after Elena's meeting with Jennifer. Rachel had helped her craft it carefully, including Jennifer's statement, Elena's documentation, and a professional analysis from Dr. Sarah Chen based on the videos and medical records Elena had managed to photograph. "Now we wait," Rachel had said. "CPS is overloaded. It could be days or weeks before they follow up." It took 4 days. Elena was in the nursery, working through morning exercises with Maya, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her step into the hallway. "Miss Vasquez, this is Detective Andrea Mills with the Westchester County Special Victims Unit. I need to ask you some questions about a report filed regarding the Dalton household." Elena's heart hammered. "Yes, of course." "Not over the phone." "Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There's a diner on Route 9, Angelo's, 8 a.m. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, her stomach churning. Detective Mills was already there, a black woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. I've read your report. I've read Dr. Chen's analysis. I've read the statement from Jennifer Kowalski. Mills stirred her coffee slowly. And I've spent the last 3 days reviewing the Dalton twins' medical history. And? Elena couldn't keep the desperation from her voice. And Dr. Bernard Holbrook's records are impeccable. Every diagnosis is supported by test results. MRIs showing underdeveloped neural pathways. EEG readings consistent with severe developmental delays. Blood work, genetic screening, physical examinations, all documented, all pointing to the same conclusion. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. But the videos show children with some visual tracking ability and minimal movement, which isn't inconsistent with their diagnosis. Mills leaned forward. Look, I'm not saying you're wrong about what you observed, but what you're describing could be explained by natural development. Kids with delays sometimes make small gains. That doesn't mean they've been misdiagnosed or abused. What about the medications? The combination of sedatives prescribed by a licensed physician for documented conditions. Anxiety, muscle spasticity, seizure prevention. All within standard treatment protocols. Elena's hands clenched around her coffee cup. So you're not going to investigate? I didn't say that. Mills pulled out a notepad. I'm saying the evidence you've provided isn't enough for a warrant or an emergency removal. But I can request a welfare check. A social worker will visit the home, observe the children, review the care being provided. If there are concerns, we escalate. And if the Daltons refuse the visit, they won't. Refusing makes them look guilty, and people like the Daltons care very much about how things look. Mill's expression softened slightly. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but this is how the system works. We have to follow procedure. The welfare check happened 3 days later. Elena wasn't there. She'd been told to take the day off, which immediately set off alarm bells. When she returned the following morning, the nursery had been transformed. New educational toys lined the shelves. A physical therapy mat had been rolled out. There were activity books and sensory items that Elena had never seen before. Mrs. Chen caught her staring. Mrs. Dalton had some items delivered. She felt the nursery needed updating. It was a performance. The Daltons had been warned somehow, had time to prepare. Elena felt sick, but worse was waiting in her email. A message from the building management of her apartment. Notice of lease non-renewal. Your tenancy will end in 30 days, as per the terms of your month-to-month agreement. Elena called the office immediately. I don't understand. I've never been late on rent. Is there a problem? No problem, miss. The owner has decided to renovate the building. All current tenants are being asked to vacate. It was a lie. Elena could hear it in the woman's voice. She called 2 other tenants in her building. Neither had received notices. The Daltons were making their first move. The next blow came 2 days later. Elena arrived at work to find Vivian waiting in the foyer, Dr. Holbrook standing beside her. Miss Vasquez. Vivian's voice was ice. Dr. Holbrook has expressed some concerns about the twins' routine. He'll be observing today to ensure their care plan is being properly followed. Elena's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. Of course, Mrs. Dalton. Dr. Holbrook was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of smooth bedside manner that probably put wealthy parents at ease. He followed Elena to the nursery, watching everything she did with clinical detachment. I understand you've been attempting some unauthorized interventions, he said, as Elena prepared the twins' breakfast. Stimulation exercises not in their care plan. I've been reading to them, talking to them. I didn't think that's the problem, Miss Vasquez. You're not qualified to think about these matters. The twins have a very specific neurological profile that requires carefully controlled stimulation. Too much can actually be harmful, triggering seizures or regression. He pulled out a prescription pad. I'm adjusting their evening medications. The increased dosage should help with the agitation I'm seeing. Elena watched him write, her throat tight. The new prescription was for a higher dose of lorazepam, more sedation, more chemical restraint. Their current dosage seems adequate, she said carefully. They've been calm, sleeping well. I'm the doctor, Miss Vasquez. Or have you completed your nursing degree since you were hired? The comment landed like a slap. He knew. Somehow he knew about her incomplete education, about her vulnerability. No, doctor. Then I suggest you follow the care plan as written. These children's well-being depends on professional oversight, not amateur enthusiasm. After he left, Elena sat on the floor between the twins' cribs, fighting tears. The increased medication would make them more lethargic, would undo weeks of the tiny progress she'd observed. And there was nothing she could do about it without revealing that she'd been going against the care plan all along. Her phone buzzed. "Rachel, we have a problem. Jennifer Kowalski just called me. She's been contacted by a private investigator asking questions about her employment history. Someone's digging into anyone connected to your report, the Daltons, almost certainly. They're building a case against you, trying to discredit you before this goes any further." Rachel paused. "Elena, they also sent a letter to my office. A cease and desist. They're threatening a defamation lawsuit if we continue pursuing this matter." Elena closed her eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means they're serious about shutting this down. And it means if we push forward, we need to be absolutely certain of our evidence, because they'll come at us with everything they have." That night, Elena sat in her apartment surrounded by boxes she'd started packing, staring at her documentation. Weeks of work, hours of careful observation, videos, photographs, notes, all of it circumstantial. All of it easily explained away by a doctor with the right credentials and a family with unlimited resources. She thought about the eviction notice, about Dr. Holbrook's thinly veiled threats, about the private investigator digging into Jennifer's past. This was just the beginning. If she continued, it would get worse. Much worse. Elena pulled up apartment listings on her laptop, scrolling through places she could afford on her salary. Most were farther from the city, smaller in rougher neighborhoods. Starting over. Again. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Stop while you still can. You don't know what you're dealing with." Elena stared at the message, her hands shaking. She should be terrified. She should quit, move, disappear like she'd done before. But then she thought about Maya's eyes, tracking that red ball with desperate precision. About Milo's finger, trembling as he tried to reach. About 4 years of silence and imprisonment. About the higher dose of medication that would be administered tonight. Pushing the twins further into the fog. Elena deleted the threatening text and opened her documentation files instead. If the Daltons wanted a fight, she'd give them one. She'd already lost everything once before. What was one more time? But even as she tried to convince herself, a cold voice in her head whispered the truth. This time, she might lose more than her apartment and her pride. This time, she might lose everything that mattered, and the twins might lose their only chance at freedom. Everything fell apart on a Wednesday in early November. Elena arrived at the mansion to find an unfamiliar car in the circular driveway. A sleek, black sedan with government plates. Her pulse quickened as she entered through the staff door. Mrs. Chen was waiting, her usually composed face drawn tight. "There are people here," she said quietly. "CPS and a court-appointed physician. Mrs. Dalton wants you in the study, now." Eleanor's heart hammered as she walked down the corridor. This should have been good news. The investigation was moving forward. But the way Mrs. Chen had looked at her suggested otherwise. The study was Marcus Dalton's domain, all dark wood and leather furniture. He stood behind his desk, still in his suit from the office, his expression unreadable. Vivian sat in one of the chairs, perfectly composed. 2 women Elena didn't recognize occupied the sofa. One in a blazer with a CPS badge clipped to her belt. The other, older with grey hair, pulled into a severe bun. And there, in the corner, was a man Elena had never seen before. Mid-40s, expensive suit, briefcase at his feet. "Lawyer, definitely. Miss Vasquez," Marcus said. His voice was controlled, but there was something dangerous beneath it. "These are Ms. Patricia Freeman from Child Protective Services and Dr. Helen Brenner, who's been appointed by the court to conduct an independent medical evaluation of our children." "I see." Eleanor's throat was dry. "What you don't see," the lawyer interjected, standing, is that your reckless accusations have put this family through hell. I'm Robert Ashford, counsel for the Daltons. We're prepared to file a civil suit against you for defamation, emotional distress, and interference with parental rights. Elena's knees went weak, but she forced herself to remain standing. Ms. Freeman cleared her throat. That's premature, Mr. Ashford. We're here to conduct an evaluation, nothing more. Ms. Vasquez, I need to ask you some questions about the report you filed. For the next 20 minutes, Elena answered questions, while 5 pairs of eyes bore into her. She explained her observations, her documentation, her concerns about the medications. Freeman's expression remained neutral throughout. I'd like to see the children now, Dr. Brenner said finally. Miss Vasquez, you'll accompany me to show me their typical routine. Elena led her to the nursery, Freeman following behind. The moment they entered, Elena's stomach sank. The twins were barely responsive, their eyes half-lidded, movements sluggish. The increased medication dosage had done its work. Dr. Brenner spent 45 minutes conducting her examination. She tested reflexes, pupil response, muscle tone. She spoke to the twins, held toys in front of them, tried to elicit reactions. Milo and Maya lay passive, barely acknowledging her presence. Can you show me the exercises you mentioned in your report? Dr. Brenner asked. Elena tried. She brought out the red ball, attempted the tracking exercises that had worked so well weeks ago. But the twins' eyes drifted unfocused. When she tried to encourage Milo to reach, his hand remained limp. I don't understand, Elena whispered. They were responsive before. They could track objects, they could move, or you saw what you wanted to see, Dr. Brenner said, not unkindly. It's common for caregivers to form attachments, to interpret random movements as intentional. But what I'm seeing here is consistent with Dr. Holbrook's diagnosis. It's the medication. They increased the dosage last week. It's making them lethargic. The medication is prescribed for a reason, Freeman interrupted. Dr. Holbrook provided us with detailed notes explaining the dosage adjustment. The twins were experiencing increased agitation and muscle spasms. The medication is therapeutic, not sedating. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to shake the twins awake, to somehow prove that this fog wasn't their natural state. But she knew how it looked. A young woman with no completed medical training, making wild accusations against respected professionals. They returned to the study. Dr. Brenner delivered her findings. The twins showed severe developmental delays consistent with their medical records. No evidence of abuse or neglect. Care appeared appropriate and professional. This investigation is closed, Freeman said, standing. Miss Vasquez, filing false reports is a serious matter. I'm going to assume you acted out of misguided concern rather than malice. But I strongly advise you to reconsider your position here. After they left, the real nightmare began. You're fired, Vivian said, her voice sharp as glass. Effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the premises and you will not return. On what grounds? Elena's voice shook. Gross misconduct, Robert Ashford said, pulling documents from his briefcase. Violating the confidentiality agreement you signed upon employment. Administering unauthorized treatments. Attempting to interfere with prescribed medical care. Making knowingly false accusations against a licensed physician. Should I continue? I was trying to help. You were trying to destroy this family, Vivian hissed, her composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? Having CPS in our home? A court-appointed physician examining our children like they're evidence in a crime? The humiliation. Your children are being drugged into silence. Elena's voice rose. They're aware they're trapped, and you're doing it deliberately. Marcus Dalton moved then, stepping around his desk. When he spoke, his voice was low and deadly. You will never work in childcare again. Mr. Ashford will ensure that every agency, every family, every institution knows exactly what you did here. You will be blacklisted. We're also moving forward with the civil suit, Ashford added. Defamation, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're seeking damages in excess of $2 million. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. $2 million. She didn't have 2,000 in her bank account. "You can't afford to fight us," Vivian said, reading her face. "You can't afford a lawyer, can't afford the years of litigation. This will follow you for the rest of your life. Unless what?" Elena whispered. Ashford slid a document across the desk. "You sign this. A comprehensive NDA with a non-disparagement clause. You never speak about the twins, the family, or anything you think you observed here. You don't contact CPS again, don't talk to lawyers, don't go to the media. In exchange, we drop the suit and provide a neutral employment reference." Elena stared at the document, her vision blurring. This was it, the choice that would define everything. Sign and save herself, or refuse and be destroyed. "I need to think. You have 60 seconds, Ashford said, clicking his pen. "After that, the offer is withdrawn, and we proceed with litigation." Elena's hands trembled as she looked at the papers. In the silence, she could hear a clock ticking on the mantel. Each second felt like a hammer blow. She thought about her empty bank account, about the eviction notice, about the career that would be over before it truly began, about spending years buried under legal fees and court dates, watching the Daltons' high-priced lawyers dismantle her piece by piece. And she thought about Milo and Maya, 3 floors above her, drugged into silence. About 4 years of imprisonment. About all the years ahead of them, trapped in bodies that worked perfectly fine, treated as less than human by people who were supposed to love them. 30 seconds, Ashford said. Elena picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line. 1 stroke of ink and it would all be over. She could walk away, start over somewhere else, build a new invisible life. The pen touched paper, and then she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it. A thump from somewhere above them. Then another, and another. Everyone in the room froze. What was that? Freeman asked, though she hadn't left yet, lingering near the door. Elena knew. She knew with absolute certainty what was happening 3 floors up. And in that moment she made her choice. She dropped the pen and ran. "Miss Vasquez!" Ashford's shout followed her, but she was already in the hallway, sprinting toward the stairs. She heard footsteps behind her. Marcus, maybe Freeman, she didn't care. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her breath burning in her lungs. The nursery door was closed, but not locked. She burst through and stopped dead. Milo was on the floor, not lying there, not placed there. He had somehow gotten himself out of his crib and was on the carpet, his small body shaking with effort. And he was moving, actually moving, dragging himself forward with his arms, his legs pushing weakly but deliberately. He was crawling toward the door, toward help, toward someone who might finally see him. Maya was gripping the crib rails, pulling herself up to standing, her legs trembling, but holding her weight. Her mouth was open, and she was making sounds, not words, but intentional vocalizations, growing louder with each breath. Behind Elena, she heard Marcus Dalton's sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God," he whispered. Elena turned to see him standing in the doorway, his face drained of color. Freeman pushed past him, pulling out her phone. "This is Freeman. I need you to get back here now. We have a situation." Vivian appeared, saw her children, and went absolutely still. For the first time since Elena had known her, there was genuine emotion on her face. Terror. "They can move," Marcus said, his voice hollow. They've always been able to—" He looked at his wife, and Elena watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Understanding and horror and rage. The crisis point had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The next 6 hours were a blur of police officers, emergency medical technicians and social workers. The twins were taken to Manhattan Memorial Hospital, not under Dr. Holbrook's care, but to a pediatric unit specializing in medical abuse cases. Marcus went with them. Vivian was escorted downtown for questioning. Elena sat in the nursery long after everyone had gone, staring at the empty cribs. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. Freeman found her there as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cream-colored carpet. "You saved them," Freeman said quietly. "If you'd signed that NDA, if you'd walked away—" "I almost did." Elena's voice was raw. "I had the pen in my hand, but you didn't. That's what matters." Freeman sat down beside her on the floor. The hospital ran a full tox screen. The twins had therapeutic levels of 3 different sedatives in their systems. Over time, those medications would have caused actual developmental damage. Another year or 2, and the lie would have become the truth. Elena closed her eyes, feeling sick. How long before we know if they'll be okay? The doctors are cautiously optimistic. They're young enough that with proper therapy, physical, occupational, speech, they should recover most, if not all, normal function. It'll take time, but they're already showing remarkable progress now that the medications are clearing their systems. And Vivian? Freeman's expression hardened. She's being charged with child abuse, medical child abuse, fraud related to the trust fund, and conspiracy. Dr. Holbrook is under investigation by the medical board. We found communications between him and Mrs. Dalton going back years. He knew exactly what he was doing. What about Marcus? That's complicated. He claims he didn't know, that his wife handled all medical decisions. Given his work schedule and the way Vivian isolated the twins, that might be true. But ignorance isn't innocence, especially when it comes to your own children. Freeman paused. He'll face civil consequences, possibly lose custody. But he's cooperating fully now. 3 months later, Elena stood in a different hospital room. This one bright with afternoon sunlight and decorated with colorful pictures the twins had finger-painted in art therapy. Milo sat in a small chair at a table, carefully stacking blocks. His movements were still a bit uncoordinated, but improving every day. Maya was across the room with a physical therapist, taking slow, deliberate steps between parallel bars, her face scrunched in concentration. "She's walked 12 feet today," the therapist called out. "That's a new record." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been crying a lot lately. Happy tears, sad tears, relieved tears. All the emotions she'd locked away while playing the invisible girl. Marcus Dalton entered the room carrying 2 juice boxes. He'd looked different from the polished CEO Elena had first met. Older, more worn, but somehow more human. He'd taken a leave of absence from his company to be with the twins during their recovery. "Elena," he said, acknowledging her with a nod. Things between them were still awkward. They probably always would be. "Mr. Dalton. Marcus, please." He handed the juice boxes to a nurse, then turned to face her fully. "I wanted you to know the trust fund is being restructured. Once the criminal cases are resolved, the twins will have access to everything they need for their care and their future. And I'm setting up a foundation in their names to help other children in similar situations." "That's good," Elena said carefully. "It's not enough. Nothing I do will ever be enough to make up for 4 years of—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "But I'm trying. I'm here now. I'm seeing them." For the first time, Elena felt something like sympathy for him. He'd been blind, willfully or not, but he was facing the truth now. That took a different kind of courage. "They need you," she said. "They need their father." "I know," his voice cracked slightly. "I'm learning how to be one." Across the room, Milo looked up from his blocks and saw Elena. His face split into a wide smile, the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. "Lena," he called out, his voice still thin and uncertain, but unmistakably clear. It was one of the 5 words he'd learned to say so far. Elena's heart swelled. She crossed the room and knelt beside him. "Hey, buddy, what you building?" "Tower." He pointed proudly at his wobbly stack of 4 blocks. "That's amazing. Can you make it even taller?" He nodded enthusiastically and reached for another block with hands that shook only slightly now. Maya finished her walking session and was wheeled over in her chair, not because she couldn't walk, but because she tired easily. She reached out and grabbed Elena's hand with surprising strength. "Book?" Maya asked. Her vocabulary was larger than Milo's, already up to 15 words. "You want me to read you a book?" Maya nodded vigorously. Later, after reading 3 picture books and watching the twins eat dinner with only minimal assistance, Elena prepared to leave. She had a long subway ride back to her new apartment in the Bronx, smaller than her old place, but hers, paid for with money from the Victims Fund and a new job at a children's advocacy center. Rachel had helped her navigate the aftermath. The Daltons had dropped all legal threats once the evidence came to light. Jennifer Kowalski had been vindicated. Dr. Brenner had submitted a formal apology for her initial assessment, and Detective Mills had personally called to thank Elena for her persistence. But the best outcome was standing right in front of her, two children laughing as they played together, learning to be kids for the first time in their lives. "Will you come tomorrow?" Milo asked as Elena gathered her things. "I'll come every day this week," Elena promised. "Just like always." "Good." He hugged her legs fiercely as Elena rode the subway home that evening. She thought about invisibility and silence and the courage it takes to speak up when the world wants you to stay quiet. She thought about the girl who'd dropped out of nursing school, who'd run from confrontation, who'd made herself small to survive. That girl was still part of her, would always be part of her. But she wasn't the whole story anymore. Elena pulled out her phone and opened her email. There was a message from the nursing school's admissions office, a response to the inquiry she'd sent last week about re-enrollment. Her heart pounded as she read it. "Dear Ms. Vasquez, we've reviewed your petition to return. Given the circumstances of your departure and your recent advocacy work, the committee has decided to grant you readmission for the spring semester. Additionally, we'd like to discuss a scholarship opportunity." Elena read the email 3 times, hardly believing it. A second chance. A path back to the dream she'd abandoned. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Dinner this weekend. I want to hear about the twins' progress. And I have news about a potential job opportunity if you're interested. A hospital is looking for someone to help develop protocols for identifying medical child abuse cases." Elena smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I'm interested in everything." She looked out the subway window at the city lights blurring past. Somewhere out there, Vivian Dalton was awaiting trial. Dr. Holbrook had lost his medical license. The mansion in Westchester was being sold, with proceeds going to the twins' care. And 2 children who'd spent 4 years in silence were learning to speak, to walk, to laugh, to live. Elena had been terrified of being seen, of taking up space, of using her voice. But she'd learned something important. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is stay silent. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust that your voice matters, even when powerful people insist it doesn't. She wasn't invisible anymore. Didn't want to be, because she'd discovered something better than safety. She'd discovered purpose. 3 weeks later, Elena sat in a lecture hall at her nursing school, notebook open, surrounded by students who had no idea who she was or what she'd done. The professor was discussing pediatric neurology. Elena took notes carefully, her hand steady. When class ended, she headed to the hospital for her regular visit with the twins. Milo ran to meet her at the door. Actually ran, his legs working perfectly now. Maya was right behind him, chattering about the picture she'd drawn in therapy. Marcus stood in the corner, watching his children with an expression of wonder and grief. He caught Elena's eye and nodded his thanks. He did that every visit. She nodded back. Some debts couldn't be repaid, only acknowledged. "Lena! Lena, watch this!" Milo shouted, then proceeded to hop on one foot, a new skill he was immensely proud of. Elena watched him, her heart full. These children had found their voices, and in helping them she'd found hers too. The silence was broken, the truth was out, and 2 children who'd been trapped for 4 years were finally, beautifully free. Some stories don't have happy endings, but this one had something better. It had hope, healing, and the promise of better days ahead, and sometimes that's more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.